I'm curious what you think, Caleb, of Tennessee being really good in baseball and softball, being good in basketball, but considering the team they had, I thought it was the run they should have had, an average run. And then when I look at Tennessee's football team, I don't think there's any question that was a disappointing year based off our expectations. You can judge it yourself. It's strange. Is it good? Is it bad that Tennessee's spring sports seem to be carrying this little bit of oomph at the end? Or do you still say to yourself, you'd rather it be a Final Four and a college football playoff? Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think you'd still rather it be a Final Four and college football playoff, but I think it's wildly ironic, honestly. And it's ironic for a couple of reasons. So I think we could safely say football, baseball, men's basketball, women's basketball is like the four most important sports. And then like a fifth that's significantly below that, but ahead of every other sport would be softball. Is that safe to say?
I think that's very safe to say, yeah. And softball is kind of getting as big as it's baseball in some circles, but anyway.
Yeah. So Tennessee won the regular season title in softball, baseball, and men's basketball for the SEC. But by far, their two best sports in history of those five is football and women's basketball, isn't it? Like, not even a question. So It's ironic that those were the two to not win. Here's another layer of irony on top of that, Dave. We think Danny White's the best athletic director Tennessee has had in decades. Well, yeah, decades. Those are the three sports in which he did not hire the head coach. He hired it in women's basketball, although he just hired it in women's basketball, to be fair. But he hasn't.
Well, let me ask you this. Are we drawing any conclusions off of that? Because I think the hires have all been solid. Are we just dealing with two sets of hiring the right guys? Or are we trying to question whether or not Danny White got lucky with Josh Heupel?
I think every athletic director before Danny White, despite the series of mistakes they all made, all landed one big hire, with the exception of Philip Fulmer. Sorry, Coach Fulmer, but you were the only one who doesn't have a good hire on your resume. But before Fulmer, Dave Hart did land Rick Barnes. Dave Hart made mistake after mistake in a lot of ways, but he got Rick Barnes. That's a big win. John Curry landed Tony Vitello. That was a heck of a hire in the process. Karen Weekly has been at Tennessee. I think Doug Dickey's the one who hired Ralph and Karen Weekly. And Danny White, to be fair, made her full-time head coach after Ralph Weekly retired. But it's not like she was already the head coach of the program. She was the co-head coach. So Danny White didn't really find her. That was a Doug Dickey, or was that a Mike Hamilton hire? I can't remember what Ralph.
It was a Hamilton. Yeah, that was a Hamilton. You know me, I'm a football first guy. So I look at it like this. I'm completely fine with Tennessee being strong in the spring and ending the fiscal year on a high note. Why? Because what is June nowadays? June is the biggest recruiting month. So you've got excitement around your program in a time that most of these kids are worried about the next camp that they're going to go to. Well, they might come home at night and do what? They might see the Diamond Vols on TV. So to me, that exposure, and I think I've told you this before, Terry Fair said he didn't know about Tennessee till he saw the Lady Vols. So this to me is a big, big deal for a lot of sports. I think that baseball gets overpubbed a little bit because there's nothing else going on this time of year as far as college baseball, but it's still pub and it's still out there and people will still watch it. And if your brand is out there, that's a good thing. Portions of the program brought to you by our good friend at Rick Terry Jewelry Design. They want to be your jeweler looking for affordable game day jewelry. How about the Fire Opals, a Tennessee tradition? RickTerryJewelry.com, RickTerryJewelry.com. And we've got news on a big promotion coming up thanks to Rick. So I'll take this year in, year out. If this is your base model of what they have accomplished this year, those four teams, you would have to take it and occasionally hope that the football team is a little bit better or jumps up a little bit over time gradually. But if this is your base model, I would take this because I think it helps you in football in June.
Oh, I think it does too. And it also helps your recruiting budget if you haven't got a lot of interest in the program. Let's call it what it is, because you can actually draw in money. The more money baseball draws in, the less money the football program has to spend to keep them afloat. And that's a huge deal. It's such a big deal to have these programs be self-sustainable if they can. Softball, they're going to have to write a check for softball. But if you have to write a little bit less, that's a big win. And so I think that's a huge part of this, as well as what you're talking about with being relevant in June. And look, I in defense of Danny White also, I mean, let's be honest. It's easy to just hire a new baseball coach when just because the program's not winning. You know what I mean? It's easy to hire a men's basketball. You can turn around overnight, quite honestly. Softball's been stable for a while. It's hard to hire a football coach to turn around a program like what he had at Tennessee in 2021 when he had to hire Josh Heupel. That was a disaster of a program that was in gigantic trouble. So that's kind of a big deal. Now, I want to go real quick. This is actually an interesting twist on it from the message boards, Dave, and I usually don't do this, but given the way you prioritize your money and your budget, it is true South Carolina is in the market for a new baseball coach, and they're the most prestigious program in the SEC. If you're Danny White, do you open the checkbook to keep Tony Vitello, or do you say, I can make as good of a hire on a cheap end?
This sounds crazy, but regardless of record, Bobby Cox was extremely successful, right?
Yes.
But he was also beloved by Braves fans. So there's that little bit of innate that you can't put your finger on that Vitello has with the community. And they love him. The ladies think he's gorgeous. The guys think he's super cool. So maybe if it was just Vitello with his success level and not the appeal, then I would say, yes, you could go out and hire another coach to have the same amount of success. But Vitello is like the perfect fit in Knoxville. As far as a coach, I could argue he's as good of a perfect fit as like Philip Fulmer. I mean, he just has slid into this role and become one of the most popular people in East Tennessee.
Yes, he has. And I want to correct it. They have not fired head coach yet. But he's on the hot seat. So they're looking to fire him, South Carolina. So I kind of agree in the sense of, particularly with this baseball, just winning doesn't really, you don't know if that's going to draw people to the stands. You need a little flash and pizzazz, don't you, to make sure people are in the stands? And
yes,
Tony Vitello is putting people in the stands with his flash and pizzazz. So I think that alone makes him worth the money. I totally agree. Saturday Down South basically has an article. I want to give them a shout out. Basically making Tony Vitello the Lane Kiffin of college baseball, which it's kind of funny because of their personalities, because they just rub everybody else in the league, the wrong way. And so, yeah, I think because of that, Tony Vitello may be Danny White. I trust the hire he made with Josh Heupel. And look, you and I both know football's the engine that drives the train. An athletic director is judged by the football hire and nothing else. And Danny White, I think, made the right football hire. But in terms of relative to their sport, Tony Vitello seems like the best hire at this point, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah. I mean, but in retrospect, you had Lane Kiffin that bolted, after years. So that's definitely a little bit different. And leading into this month of June, I know that you're not going to have a situation in which they're going to be on campus. I understand. I think we had a question. I'm not talking about official visitors. I'm just talking about the publicity that you get from being in the College World Series. I don't know how much money that thing generates, but it gets a ton of pub because ESPN's involved with it. And that's the bottom line. So I think that Tennessee will certainly benefit from that.